I'll start. I hope everyone can hear me. This is Catherine Underhill. I am the Executive Director here at View, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening. If any of you have video, if you could please turn off your video and mute your, if you have your audio on, that would be great. So this is a first for us. We are experimenting with technology, and I appreciate you, your flexibility and patience as we do so. We're delighted that you opted to join us this evening. We have 3 artists with us, and it's great because they're in various locations, and we are here at View. So we have live camera feed from our galleries, and we're going to be able to hear from these 3 artists, all of whom are participating in our Quilts Unlimited exhibition here at View. Their work is on view through November 19, and the rest of the show is actually open until December 3. Also, this conversation this evening is being recorded, and so we'll have a link to it, and you can share it with your friends, family, and colleagues, and it'll be up on YouTube and available through our website. We are intentionally informal this evening, and so we'll be talking sometimes to our camera person, Travis Kiefer. Want to acknowledge and thank him for his work this evening, and I really want to thank our artists who have taken the time to join us here this evening. We're quite excited to be able to offer this to you. We're going to let each of the 3 artists speak as we illustrate with the work that's in the galleries. And then I would encourage you to use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to share any questions or comments with us. And as we reach the end of the presenting part, I will select a few questions if there are some, and we'll have some more informal dialogue, and then we'll wrap it up. And if anyone needs anything, use your raise hand or use the chat feature, and I'll try to keep an eye on that. Okay? All right, we're going to begin with Jane Davila, who is a founding member of the trio Textilis. And I'm going to ask Jane to unmute and tell us a little bit about how that group came together, what unites you, what distinguishes you, why these 3 artists, and we'll go from there. Okay?
Sounds great.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. This has just been an absolute pleasure to both exhibit at View and to have the opportunity to talk about our work. I'm really honored about this. So the group is 3 of us artists. Gwen and I are both based in Connecticut, and Liz Kettle, the 3rd artist who's not able to join us tonight, is based in Seattle, Washington. The 3 of us have actually known each other for a pretty long time. I've known Liz for probably going on 20 years now, and I've known Gwen, I would say 10 years, more than 10 years. I don't know, a long time. And I think that we all have a similar approach to our work, kind of a thoughtful way of approaching the material itself, and then to have really deep thoughts about the work and what it means and what it can represent and what it conveys to an audience. And the 3 of us, kind of came up with the idea of the exhibit and then worked on pieces independently and didn't talk too much about what we were making. And we did make new work for the show, and we were really pleasantly surprised as we got closer to finishing that the work really was cohesive together. So, I know my work works by itself, Gwen's works by itself, Liz's works by itself, but when you saw all 3 of them together, they not only reflected the same type of theme about ephemerality of material and life and what human impact on nature, but we also ended up with a very similar color palette. And none of that was planned. I think we happened to all be kind of in tune, and it worked out really beautifully well, we think, in that case. So Yeah, and that's kind of how we came about doing this show. Liz and I have shown together before, actually at View a long time ago, with a group of 8 artists, and had a show with a pretty strict theme. And we decided this year that it would be nicer to have a theme where we wouldn't have no theme and kind of all explore work, because we knew we all worked very cohesively together. That's kind of the direction that we went in. The pieces that I am showing in the exhibit are these 6, they're like collar pieces. They're small scale. The largest piece is about 12 inches tall, 14 inches tall. So they're not, they're not meant to be worn, but they are reminiscent of collar and, sort of what a person would wear around their neck. And I am very aware of cultural appropriation and trying to be really cautious about not doing that. And I'm aware that these pieces have a very kind of generic ethnic appeal to them or sense about them, but they actually come from a different place. So they are inspired by something that's called a lunula. And when you have more than one, they're called lunulae. So that's the plural of it. And they're actually a Bronze era. So we're talking about 2400 BC, like really old. Collars, these necklaces that were usually made out of beaten gold. And they were worn, or they're mostly found in Ireland and in coastal Northern Europe, which is actually, thanks to Ancestry.com, I happen to know where my ancestors come from. And they mostly have been found like under standing stones. So places like, like Stonehenge, but not Stonehenge, but those types of really old Stone Age, Bronze Age locations, and then in bogs, because bogs, things don't rot in bogs and they don't degrade because of the unique qualities of the water and the acidity in the water. And so I had seen some of these shapes and these forms in an archaeology paper that I had been reading, and I was very intrigued by the shape and the idea of it. So I started playing with it. That's actually the one on the screen is actually the first one that I made, and that's like the traditional lunula shape. So lunula, the word itself comes from of the moon, so lunar, and that's the typical shape. And I really wanted to kind of play with that shape and then start playing with texture and pattern and color, but keep it very muted and kind of quiet, and then introduce natural elements into it as well. And there's another piece that's more rectangular. I'm not sure where it is on the wall, Travis. That's the one exactly. So if you can zoom in on that one really closely, all of these are hand stitched, hand beaded. They've got a tremendous amount of beading and stitching on it. So the center of that one has all of this like patterns of stitching with X's and lines and things like that. And it actually, for me, kind of harkens back to developing your own, like a visual vocabulary, like your own alphabet. And one of my personal heroes is Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan was part of a project where they sent a kind of a satellite out into outer space, and they included on the outside of it, it was all made out of gold. So it kind of harkens back to this project where things were originally made out of gold, but they had to create they were trying to, in case it was ever encountered by aliens or other, civilizations, they had to develop a way to create symbols and an alphabet on the surface of this satellite that people could, or creatures or beings could read it and interpret it without knowing English or Russian or, Swahili or whatever language. And so it's all like symbols and lines, and it's binary code, and all those things. And I really started thinking deeply while I was working on it, because stitching is very meditative, and you start thinking about all sorts of things, like your mind wanders while you're stitching. And so I started thinking about, how does one develop your own visual vocabulary, your own alphabets, as it were, in stitch and in pattern. And so this for me was like a visual alphabet. It doesn't really say anything, but it became like, how do we communicate with each other? How do we when there's language barriers and all sorts of other things. And I also wanted to incorporate natural materials into it. So I've got, you know, the seed pods on the top of that. Other ones have, they've got seed heads. There's dried flowers. There's a lot of things that are made of bone or metal or clay. I really love collecting beads and don't always get a chance to use a lot of them, but I really wanted to have that texture. And a lot of the beads are handmade beads. So it's more, you know, people's hands kind of touching all of that and involved in all of that. The fabrics themselves are all organic fabrics. They're linens and cottons. Some of them are wax linen that I brought back from Korea when I was teaching there. There's pieces of glass in there. The threads are things like linen and cotton threads again, because it's, you know, I wanted that organic texture and that sense of organicness in it. And then once I had made them, I had to find a way to display them. And so I made these little bases out of wood and had metal rods in them. And so the pieces themselves are constructed out of fabric, but then they're backed with museum board to give them rigidity and structure so that they can stand up. And then the bases are attached to them, kind of attached to the back of them to be able to stand, because I wanted them to have that sense of like museum display. I wanted them to have a little bit of that and not have it just simply hanging on the wall. I wanted it to feel more sculptural and less wall hanging or wall piece. And that's kind of where I went, but I really love playing with the shapes of all of those. And I'm really looking forward to exploring even more shapes going forward. The exaggeratedness of starting with that the original curve shape and then stretching it and morphing it into all sorts of other directions. So the next piece that we're going to talk about is actually Gwen's, and her piece is in the center of the room, and it has a very three-dimensional shape. And I'm loving what Gwen is doing with the materials and what she was doing with space in this piece. So we'll let Gwen talk about this next. You want to unmute yourself, Gwen? You're still muted. Just have to hit the microphone on the bottom of your name.
There we go.
There you go.
Hi, this is my first sculptural piece, actually. I'm primarily a abstract painter, and I also do marbling on fabric. So this concept came to me as I was looking around my yard. There's so many dead trees. The ash trees have been pretty much decimated by parasites and borers. And they're just standing dead everywhere. And you watch the weather and you watch what's happening in the world to different things. And it occurred to me that, you know, we're being decimated by climate change. And so that's what this piece is basically about. It's made of tea bags and stitching, and also acrylic medium. The long pieces with the feathery ends are curved and they represent the wind. There's a piece at the bottom that is sort of a diamond shape, an elongated diamond that represents the core of the earth. And the piece above it and to the left was represented the oceans and how things are drying up. And there's flat plain pieces too that just have some stitching on them that represents, you know, the dying vegetation. So I really don't know what to say about this, but it's a passion of mine to watch all this, and it breaks my heart to see what's happening to the world through climate change. That's really pretty much all I have to say about this.
Gwen, are there any companion pieces to this, or it sounds like it's a unique element in your body of work. Does it relate to other things that you're currently working on? And when did you do this?
I started this, I believe, in February, and I started to make pieces out of Encostaflex. I would paint the piece and then I cut it into shape and get the shapes to come together through fusing. And when I worked on that, I said, oh, the tea bags are the thing because they have the natural color of the earth in them. And it really does represent that drying of the earth and things blowing away. And that's what I was really looking for.
Well, it's very beautiful. This is the ocean component, right?
Yes,
And you've got
because
that.
all our rivers, the glaciers, they just said today, the glaciers will be gone by 2050. That's heartbreaking to me. So I think we just need to pay more attention to our surroundings. And if this piece helps people do that, I'm very happy about that.
Great, thank you. I think we'll go back to Jane because the third member of Textilis is not able to be with us, and Jane is going to introduce her work on her behalf. Okay?
Thank you.
So
You're
the
welcome.
piece,
Thanks, Gwen.
yeah, the piece to the left of that is called Memories of Earth. Sorry, Travis, it's the other side. Actually, yeah, that one, that's perfect. So this one was created with rust printing. And what that means is finding different types of shapes that react with water and then letting them rust, letting them, form all these shapes and things. And what it's doing is describing our connection to the earth and the effects of time, what man is doing on the environment. And it's also talking a lot about decay and what happens when things are left out, things decay together, decay of society. There's a lot of, depth and meaning in that. The piece to the right of Gwen's piece, the larger blue piece where Travis was a second ago, is called Waiting for Eternity. And that one is made of silk and cotton, and it's all hand stitched together. And the technique that's used to stitch that together is called pojagi. It's a Korean technique where all the seams are finished on both sides. It was traditionally done with very transparent fabrics. A lot of them were made as window coverings. And so they needed to look good from both sides. And it's a very delicate, really beautifully done finish on a way of finishing fabric, especially really, really delicate fabrics that would fray a lot. It's a really excellent way to be able to use a lot of silks. But the piece itself was made while her stepfather was dying. And so it's all about, how all of us are waiting for eternity and the transparency and beauty in life. It's a really stunning piece. It's got a lot of hand-dyed fabrics in it. And I'm just loving the way all of her colors have come together. A really gorgeous piece. And I love the uneven edges, the way it's really kind of unresolved, because lives are never like neat and tidy and don't just finish. There's always undone stuff at the end. And then if we can switch over to the Migrants Alphabet, which is on the other wall. The Migrants Alphabet was a project that I started in 2018, and Natalia actually has a piece in this exhibit as well. But the exhibit was inspired by a book that was written by two Quaker sisters in the 1800s, and they were against slavery and the issues of slavery. It was around the time of the Civil War, and there used to be rallies where they would try to educate children and adults about the evils of slavery. And they wrote a book together called, oh my God, my mind just went blank. It was an anti-slavery alphabet, an abolitionist alphabet. And I had heard about this and read about this at the same time that I was becoming aware of a lot of issues over migration and immigration and things going on at the border in this country. My husband happens to be from another country himself, so migration, immigration is something that we're both very aware of, and is something that, kind of affects us as well on a personal level. So I invited a lot of artists from around the country to take part in this. This first piece is the letter B. So in the original book, each letter had a small poem that went along with it to help kind of explain what it meant, and each letter had something to do with the fight against slavery. So this alphabet has to do with the issues around migration, and migration could be for anything. People migrate for a lot of reasons. They migrate for adventure, they migrate for economic opportunity, they migrate for education, or for marriage, or to join family members, or for work. There's so many reasons that people migrate, and it's an issue that has been around since the dawn of time and will continue to be around forever as well. So that first piece is called B is the Border. It was made by an artist named Liliana Hueso, and she lives in both California and Tijuana. She's a photographer and a filmmaker. She's a professor in a college. She's also an activist. She works on the border. She intentionally is showing the border from the Mexican side, both in day and at night. This is part of a part that's called Freedom Park. And it's a symbol of the constant division of lives, because there are families that are split by that border and they're on both sides. And Freedom Park actually has a lot of weddings and baptisms and dances and events in it, where some of the family is on one side of the border and some of the families on the other side of the border. And it's the only way that they can celebrate things together. The next one we're going to go to is called E is the Empathy. And that was made by an artist named Jamie Fingal in California. And she's an illustrator and a sewer, and she also often depicts themes around home and domesticity. And so her piece is all about, walking a mile in people's shoes, like to understand them, to hope that people are not quick to judge, and to find empathy and humanity in each other in all circumstances. Letter H is made by an artist from Arkansas. His name is Ahmed Abrimafar. He's an artist in residence at Arkansas Children's Hospital. He works with political and social issues. He believes that art has the ability to cross division, and it has the ability to heal. And he does that in his work. He does that in his art. This piece is about how war creates refugees, that then the countries that start wars or promulgate wars are actually reluctant to help those people. He was inspired by a poem from a Persian poet named Saidid. He writes, "Human beings are members of a whole, in creation and of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human you cannot retain." So that's really very thoughtful. That piece is mixed media, and it has a lot of like stones in it, and about the buildings that get destroyed in war, homes that get destroyed in war, and what happens then. The next piece is J is for Justice. That is made by an artist named Shauna Melton. She's also a poet. She's in Connecticut. She also helped me find artists for this exhibit. We wanted the exhibit to reflect as much as we possibly could the population of the US. So there are men and women, gay and straight, brown and black and white, young and old, every type of demographic that we could possibly find. And Shauna was like invaluable in helping me find more of the artist. This work is about the trauma of separation, trying to find a center of ourselves when we don't know our own history. Children have been separated from their parents from the time of slavery in the beginning of this country until today, and we should spend more time developing our mutual humanity. Parents will risk everything to keep their children safe, and we should recognize that impulse in other people and show mercy toward them. The next piece is actually, we're just going to go really fast because it's Natalia and she can talk about it later, but K is the Kindness is her piece, and it is made in her signature plastic fabric with lots of hand stitching and lots of machine stitching, and it's absolutely stunning. The next one is M is the Migrant, and it is made by an artist from New Mexico named Sabrina Zarco. She was also incredibly instrumental in helping me find artists. This piece is very heavily embroidered. Sabrina is the child of her family, ancestors are migrants, and so she's very aware of the issues around that. She is a Chicana multimedia artist and activist, a community educator, and was, again, so instrumental in helping find the artist. Now, the poems that went along with it, the poem with this one is really beautiful. It's M is the Migrant. It's what animals and people do. To migrate is natural, to move and to roam, for work, to be safe, or live somewhere new. Sometimes they stay longer and make it their home. So she created this piece with Art Nouveau calligraphy that sort of elevates then the character of the migrant worker, the field worker that's there. Migrant workers work in incredibly dangerous conditions. They work with pesticides, lack of water, lack of cleanliness, extreme weather conditions. Children often work in the fields and they don't go to school. They move often to follow the work, and it disrupts their education. They're not paid fairly, but yet they're very vital to our society. They harvest our food and they live in the shadows of all of society. S is the smuggling is the next one. And this is really interesting because it's such a dichotomy. Alicia Smith is an artist from New Mexico. She is a Chicana artist and activist, a printmaker and sculptor. She depicts hard topics with really spare beauty. So this is actually a print. She captures the ambiguity of smuggling people. So if you think about smuggling people, we celebrated that during World War II when people were trying to get Jewish people out of Europe. And yet there are negative connotations about the idea of smuggling people now. And the character of coyote, which is a term that is used for smugglers on the southern border, it's used disparagingly, is actually a sacred animal to indigenous people, precisely because of its ability to permeate borders or boundaries. And then the final one we're going to talk about is Why is the Yearning? And that one's made by an artist named Lyric Kennard. She's in North Carolina. Her poem is, why is the yearning, longing to be free, to live in peace and safety, just like you and me? And Lyric's ancestors came over literally on the Mayflower and other earlier colonial times, and then as recently as escaping Castro and his regime in Cuba. And so she gave a lot of thought to what determines the value of a migrant, somebody who's coming here, you know, the time period, what they're escaping from, who they are. And so a lot of the pictures in the background of that piece are actually of her ancestors and others, and that she created. And you can see the letter Y in the piece, kind of in the barbed wire on the top of that. So it really depicts well that sense of yearning and wanting to have the freedom to live your life and raise your children. So yeah, we're just really grateful for all of the artists and taking part of that. And so delighted that Natalia was able to be part of it as well. And that her very signature work is part of that exhibit, which travels around the country.
Thank you so
over to
much,
you,
Jane.
Natalia.
That was amazing. And there's so much to see in this exhibition. It's very rich, extremely diverse, and the Migrants Alphabet really allowed us to be able to present work from artists all over the country. So, and also it's a great transition to Natalia's work, which we're going to see next. It's installed in our Eco Gallery. And so we're going to give Travis a moment to move from one gallery to the other. And while he's doing that, I would like to introduce Natalia and ask her to, her work is, as Jane said, characterized by the use of non-recyclable materials. So I was hoping you could start us off by telling a little bit about how you began to get into that, why you chose to work in that material, and how that's affected your working style, your technique, and so forth. So I'll turn it over to you, Natalia, and thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I am honored to have the opportunity to have a solo exhibit at the View Art Center. It was a delightful opportunity that I'm in the Eco Gallery, which just speaks so much to my work. I have been using single-use plastic for the majority of my work now for over 10 years. And the change came over gradually. I had a, so to speak, a thrifty upbringing. I grew up in the Soviet Union, and that's just how things were, unless you were an oligarch or a highly placed party person. When I was growing up and we immigrated in 1979, you really made do. Whatever it is, you made do. My grandmother was a jack of all trades. She stitched, she drew, and she was an amateur photographer and a pediatric surgeon. So She was my real inspiration behind most of my work, is because you can do just about anything. She was, I always thought of her as, well, once I got into watching American TV, she's the real MacGyver. And I always think of myself as MacGyvering the next project. But the single-use plastic came into my work sort of very slowly. When I first started saving a few plastic bags here and there, it was because I really like the color, or I like the texture, or I like the graphics on it. And the plastic bags were not as ubiquitous as they are now. This was probably 20 years ago. You know, you went to a fancy store, they gave you a fancy bag, and you were like, oh, I think I'm going to save that and use it again. It's very pretty. And then somewhere along the lines, my collection grew, and I actually don't really remember the actual time I used it for the first time, but it's most likely it was, I was making an artwork from fabric or fabric scraps, and I was lacking a certain color, and there it was in my plastic bag stash. So I used it. And that's pretty much how I figured out that I can stitch single-use plastics just as well as fabric. So these days, my main material is single-use plastic, and occasionally some vintage textiles. And what you see here in this piece, this is Iron Spine 5XL, and XL stands for extra large, obviously. And what you're looking at is a bed sheet circa 1950s Soviet Union. When my kids were little, I started taking them back to now Russia for visits during the summer. And I discovered that my aunt had a stash of household linens from both my grandmothers in her closet that she didn't know what to do with. So I helped her out. I got two suitcases and took all those linens home with me. And these are really utilitarian linens, like bed sheets and kitchen towels that have been mended by one grandmother or another grandmother and have seen a lot of use over the years. So in my daily life here, obviously, I'm not going to be using linen sheets from the 1950s, but they make perfect art material for me. So I am greatly influenced by urban architecture. As you can see, fire escapes here. So what I have combined here is that vintage bed sheet, some dryer sheets, and a lot of plastic. So the beauty of single-use plastic is that it is translucent and transparent, and I can layer one over the other and get really lovely gradations of color. So it's interesting to me to use it as a really wonderful art material, save it from the landfill where it's causing really awful pollution for our planet and is a major contributor to climate change. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but only 5% of plastic in the US actually gets recycled. So these soft plastics that I use for my work and that I stitch are the ones that are hardly ever get recycled because there's no market for them. So that's what you see here. This piece was constructed with single-use plastic and a vintage dryer sheet. And then we will move on to my installation in the other part of the Eco Gallery. And there it is. Oops, sorry, the dog is barking. So I have lived in an apartment with a fire escape only twice, but clearly fire escapes made quite the impression on me. Perhaps it's because I lived there as a teenager, and I had never experienced them before. There's something really wonderful about the graphic lines of a fire escape. So it is, it's just a strong image that has always intrigued me. And I was delighted to try to figure out how to make it out of an ephemeral material such as plastic. So it would actually sway in the wind and be very light as a feather. So what you're looking at, the pink fire escape, is paper and plastic. It's all stitched together. And there's even some styrofoam little bits and pieces trapped in there, and little paper bits and things. I use everything that comes into my studio and reuse everything. So the paint marks you're seeing is from freezer paper that I use to protect my table surface when I paint some materials. So this was completely reused, from the plastic to the paper to styrofoam packaging. Everything was reused in this particular fire escape. There's 3 fire escapes in the installation. The other one is all clear plastic. And that's the most ubiquitous material. If you ever go looking for plastic, the one you see the most is the clear plastic. And then I created the third one from plastic straws. We keep trying to get them outlawed in New York State, but I don't think they have gotten outlawed just yet. And they're just a really horrible pollutant. But for me, it was an interesting experiment to see how I can use the straight lines of the straws and stitch it all together by hand. So that's the third fire escape in this installation, which I am delighted to see hanging in the middle of the room there. I hope it sways with the wind or a breeze. So if we go on to the next wall, the 6 pieces on that wall are from my Vertigo series, Vertigo 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And what they are inspired by are the infrastructure of roadways. So I am just the type of person that you're going to be leaning on the horn, honking behind, because I'm stopped at a red light and I'm looking up at the infrastructure of whatever is the bridge on top of me, and I'm taking quick snaps at the light, not when I'm driving, of what it looks like, all those beams, all the rust work, the rust stain, and just how there's a graphic nature to all those beams and the heaviness of it all. So that really inspires my work, and I try to reconstruct it out of single-use plastic. These pieces are plastic shopping bags, Mylar, and bubble wrap. Yes, you can stitch through bubble wrap. They're all machine stitched and hand stitched. I love combining machine stitching and hand stitching. I usually use machine stitching just for the main lines of the artwork, and then I add a lot of hand stitched details to really try to show the texture of the piece. So that's what those 6 pieces are, just varying. There's, I don't know if any of you are New Yorkers, maybe you'll recognize the BQE, perhaps. I've been stuck underneath the BQE for quite many times. So then if we can go on to the last piece that I'm going to share about. It's an installation piece on a Lazy Susan, so it actually rotates. But how this piece came about, to be honest with you, is we had some CD towers in the house and nobody listens to CDs anymore. So I had these CD towers and I said, oh my God, these are just taking up space. So I tried to give them away and nobody wanted to take them. Nobody else needed the CD towers. And I didn't want to throw them in the trash because they were not from a recyclable plastic. Thank you for turning it, Travis. So I decided to try to use them as a substrate for a sculptural piece. So I used single-use plastic to make casings for these CD towers, and I stitched fire escapes on them. And then I added letters cut off from plastic to be an interpretation of graffiti on the buildings. But what I decided to take as an inspiration for my graffiti is the Declaration of Human Rights that was put out by the United Nations, and I believe in 1946. And there were just some really wonderful turns of phrase in it about human dignity and aspiration and just being able to live as a a dignified human being. So those were the few words that I took out from the declaration and graffitied onto my buildings. So they're all single-use plastic. The CD towers, of course, are not completely single-use plastic because they have been used for a long time, but unfortunately they're not recyclable, just like the soft plastic that encircles them. So that is sort of my my story there. I try to use single-use plastic as much as possible, just little bits of it being kept out of the landfill and out of the incinerators, because I live in Westchester County, so that's plastic goes to the incinerator here with the rest of the trash. And with using it, I hope to inspire others to learn about plastic pollution and all the ways that it attributes to climate change. And hopefully together we can all do a very little bit here and there and help our children live in a cleaner planet.
Thank you so much, Natalia. That was lovely. And it's so interesting. I've been listening to the three of you and these themes of what's happening with the earth, what we as humans, our impact on the earth, and also these issues of human rights and justice and kindness, time, also the expanse of time from Jane's reference from was it the Byzantine era, or have I got that wrong?
Oh, the Bronze Era.
The Bronze Era, longer ago. So the Bronze Era all the way to contemporary times and changes that are happening along the way, both with us as a human race and with the earth. It's interesting to me that the three of you and the installation as a whole, I think really resonates with some of these, the whole idea of quilting as such an old tradition being adapted by all of you, and the use of materials that are non-traditional. It makes for a really rich and engaging visual experience. And I hope that those of you who have had a chance to see this work for the first time will also have an opportunity to come to view and see the work in person. But we're delighted to be able to share it in a much larger way geographically using the internet. So I want to just turn to questions. If anyone has any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. I do have one that came through, which is the question from Ashley as to whether or not the migrants' alphabet will be made into a book, or is that, what is the future of those pieces?
So there is a website. It's just migrantsalphabet.com. There is a plan to make a book. Life and the pandemic got a little bit in the way of that, but I would like to circle back to that and make that a reality. It is something like when we were building the website, we wanted to include resources about how to learn more about a lot of these topics. So the resources vary from the United Nations website to specific organizations that are helping migrants and immigration. And then also places where you can donate money, where it'll really make a difference if you felt called to do that and wanted to help people in various situations. And it's interesting, in this country, we do tend to think of migrants and migration as only affecting the southern border, but there are migrants from every country in the world that come to the United States from the beginning of the time of this, before this country was formed. I live in a city where we've accepted and welcomed migrants from a lot of different places, including most recently Syria and Afghanistan. And it makes the city that I live in much richer and more interesting and more vibrant and more diverse. And so, I think that a lot of us in that exhibit came to this place. We had a Facebook group where we talked about the work as we were all working on it and kind of worked through issues. And some people changed their letters or changed the things that their letters stood for. while we were working, but everyone brought their own experience. I mean, Natalia moved here from Russia. Other people fled war. Other people, you know, their grandparents came here. Other people like Lyric, their ancestors came here on the Mayflower. So it was a spectrum of people coming from all over the place and for many, many, many reasons. And it will literally be an issue that mankind will deal with forever because people move around. They just do for so many reasons. And a lot of thought just needs to be put into how we react to it as a community, as a country, as a world, as everything.
And it's being impacted by climate change too. Climate driven migration is only going to get more extreme as well. So you've touched on, I think, as you said, it's an enduring challenge to accommodate the change in location of all these people and their needs as they move around. If anyone has any other questions, I'd be happy to field them on behalf of the group. And if not, I want to start by thanking all of the artists, everyone who exhibited in this show, but especially the three of you who have been able to join us here this evening. It's been a really inspiring conversation, and I'm delighted that you could take the time to be with us, and also your patience and flexibility as we explored new technology here at VIEW, combining live from our galleries, imagery, and artists from various locations. So that's been exciting for us, and I wanted to thank Travis Kiefer, who's our cameraman this evening. He's ingenious and creative, and I think embodies the spirit of VIEW, which is to be creative and to be innovative in the way that we're approaching things. And thanks to all of you who have joined us here this evening. Please keep an eye on all that's happening at VIEW. We've got a lot of great programs coming up, and visit our website, viewarts.org, to revisit any of this conversation, which will be there as a link to YouTube, and to see upcoming programs as they emerge. I think that's it, and I want to just thank you all for joining us this evening, and have a good rest of your evening and what looks to be a warm weekend with climate change coming up. All right, thanks everybody. Take good care. Thank you.
So much.
Good evening.